I think this is a fundamental change.
Prolongation of the Constitution.
Hello and welcome to the 7th episode in our series, The Evolution of a Nation. A documentary series chronicling Uganda's key political and socio-economic history. I'm Bart Kakoza. In the previous episode, we saw Mutesa becoming the first president of Uganda, Uganda's post-independence economic and social power, DP's struggles in parliament, and the development of cracks within the UPC Kabaka-Eka alliance. In this episode, we focus on the thorny issues of the lost counties and Obote's road to usurpation of powers. Thanks for joining us. In 1964, Obote's government confronted its first major national democratic undertaking after independence, the resolution of the lost counties issue. The two counties of Biaga and Bugangezi that had been turned over to Buganda as a reward for assisting in British defeating of Bunyoro. For the Banyoro living in these two counties, who felt were still being treated as colonial subjects, independence would not be real before the return of the counties. As per the resolution of the Lancaster Constitutional Conference, 1964 marked 2 years after independence, the time set for holding the referendum in the two counties. Amidst protests from Buganda royalists, a bill was subsequently tabled in Parliament to that effect.
It was mainly moved by the UPC, and certainly the Kabaka-Eka allies were against it. They could not agree that there should be a referendum. They could not agree that Buyaga and Bugangezi should break away and go back to Bunyoro. And that was very, very explosive until when Parliament pressed through, Obote pressed through to resolve it through implementing the order in the council, and also the British councillors, privy councillors, had pointed out that it was a very, very thorny issue that had to be resolved.
In various places, when they faced a very tricky, difficult, contentious political issue, they tended to put it in bracket, postpone any solution, let the natives handle it after independence. There's no earthly reason why the British and the British rule before independence could not have resolved that matter definitively. Whether in the negotiations in Lancaster at the round table and agreed this is what we agree upon and signed, or to have held the plebiscite, the referendum, while the British were still here.
The alliance, KY-UPC alliance, had by that time had a lot of cracks, because some members of the Buganda members of the parliament, who were KY members, had already crossed over to become UPC in parliament. Obote felt not bound anymore by the arrangements of the alliance. So Obote becomes stronger. He has a clear majority in parliament.
Now, this decision no doubt deepened the rift between the Kabaka and Obote. Mutesa considered Obote's move a breach of the promise he made at the Lancaster pre-independence talks, during which the Buganda delegation had walked out to protest the conference's decision to allow a referendum to resolve the lost counties issue. Obote had persuaded the delegation to return to the talks, allaying their fears with a handwritten note to the Katikilo confirming that since UPC and Kabaka-Eka coalition will be in power, they would find a political way of avoiding the referendum. Now, 2 years after, the Katikilo still kept the note and presented it to Obote, reminding him of the promise he made.
With the meeting I attended
Where was that meeting?
In Entebbe, in the Prime Minister's office in Entebbe. And the Katikilo pulled out a note and said, Mr. Obote, don't you remember that you had promised support to me, that there shall be no referendum, and is this not your note? And Obote says, yes, certainly, you are right, Mr. Katikkiro. That's my handwriting and that's my note. But please remember that that note is not the Constitution of Uganda. What does the Constitution of Uganda say? It says that after 2 years independence, there shall be a referendum. And this is what I'm now putting in force.
In his capacity as the Minister of Justice, Grace Ibingira moved the following motion in the House on the 25th of August 1964. Resolved that the House, in accordance with provision of paragraph A of subsection 1 of section 28 of Uganda Independence Order in the Council 1962, do hereby appoint the day of 4th November 1964 as the date on which the referendum to ascertain the wishes of the inhabitants of the counties of Biaga and Bugangezi as the territory in which each of the two counties should be included shall take place. During the debate, Kabaka Eka members walked out. To lend it his personal relationship, Kabaka had set up a development scheme in Ndaiga, an area in the Lost Counties, in 1963, believing that one of the ways of ensuring retention of the territory was to develop it. That way, he believed he would be able to persuade the Banyoro to stay in Uganda. In a desperate move to boost votes, Mutesa settled over 4,000 Second World War ex-servicemen in the area to increase the Buganda population, but this move proved counterproductive.
There was a clause that barred those who settled after independence from voting. So actually the Baganda who were settled there after independence were disenfranchised. They were not allowed to vote in the referendum. And that was another issue that angered, of course, the Kabaka, because he hoped that their vote would boost the vote in favor of Buganda.
Now, notwithstanding all these efforts, when the results of the referendum were declared on the 5th November, the residents had voted overwhelmingly to be part of the Kingdom of Bunyoro. It was a decision that was welcomed not only in Bunyoro, but all the minority nationalities in the country.
There was a clause that the president had to sign all constitutional instruments of parliament in order for them to become law, to put in force the results of the referendum, altering the boundaries of Buganda and Bunyoro. The president is now the Kabaka of Buganda, who is required to sign the constitutional instruments of parliament. He says, no, I can't sign away my territory. And that gives you those people who had originally said, Kabaka, don't go into the national politics. You stay as the Kabaka. Let other people contest. Now, he's brought into that collision already. And Obote says, you can't refuse to sign these instruments because you swore that you were going to uphold the Constitution of Uganda as president. And there had been a provision in that law that if the president refused or was unable to sign those instruments, the prime minister could sign, and that became law. When Mutesa refuses as president to sign those instruments, Obote signs under that law as prime minister.
That was forgotten. The lost counties was forgotten, and the Buganda moved on.
The loss of these counties was very painful to Buganda. When the results were announced, there was a state of confusion and disbelief at Mengo. The Katikkiro Michael Chint was heckled and booed during the session of the Great Luchiko that debated the matter. He subsequently resigned as Katikkiro and was replaced by Mayanja Nkanji.
He said, get off with it, we don't want you, you've lost us the countries. That way, yes, but 20 countries became 18. But the 18, that fact never affected Buganda anywhere at all. But I understand that The Kabaka asked the Katike, he said, look, Katike of Uganda has rejected you. Who do you give me as Katikiro? Understand, the Katikiro said, the one I would give you would not accept him. Said, why? Because he's not married. And also, he's young. So I understand, I wasn't there. I understand, the Kawakas asked, who is he? Majankangi said, oh, was I married when I became Kabaka?
Obviously, after the decision of the referendum, Mutesa still could not relinquish his territory in its entirety. He had camped at his Indaiga country lodge from where he oversaw the referendum exercise and stayed there for a while after the referendum. His stay resulted into several incidences where it is alleged that he got involved into a shootout fracas in which some people died.
And also there were some Banyoro who went to enforce the law that now this Bugangeze Buyaga is ours, and they entered the Kabaka's Indaiga lodge to try and enforce it. And the Waganda there shot them and killed them. Also, the Banyoro ambushed some Baganda who were coming back and killed a number of them. So the whole situation was quite explosive.
People claim that the Kabaka went and shot at people in his lodge.
Let me tell you something.
What happened?
Let me tell you something. I want one person was shot by the Kabaka.
You think it didn't happen?
I don't think. I'm saying let them point one that someone was shot by the Kabaka. Kabaka Mutesa was not just, it was not sort of trigger happy.
At that time, there again, the KY marriage, KYU peace marriage, had also cracked. It was no longer there.
In 1965, Uganda celebrated the third independence anniversary. The 2 days long celebration started on October 8th with a number of activities. They included a colorful display of floats through the streets of Kampala by private companies, government parastatal bodies and NGOs. Later in the afternoon, crowds gathered at Nakivubo Stadium where they were treated to a variety of performances presented by the Uganda Army, the police force and prison service. Besides putting up a spectacular parade, the police performed motorcycle races together with a display of stunning acrobatic shows. The young professional army, made up of well-trained young patriotic Ugandans, was eager to show off the knowledge, skills and tactics it had acquired not only to defend the territorial boundaries of Uganda, but also the country's independent status.
The Mokbama battle staged by the Uganda Army towards the end of the afternoon was the highlight of the program, which attracted an audience at Nakivubo Stadium. This was an occasion characterized chiefly by discipline, but tempered with gaiety and light-heartedness. Another event that attracted a large attendance at Nakivubo Stadium was the motorcycle racing organized by the Uganda Motorcycle Racing Association. Dick Kawesa, the Moto Ace, events. He won the 650cc and the unlimited class. The rain-soaked track accounted for the slow times in all the events competed for by the club members.
The celebrations climaxed into the main jubilations the following day, the 9th October, at Kololo Airstrip.
The commander of the Uganda Army, the Chief Justice of Uganda, Prime Minister Dr. Milton Obote and Mrs. Obote. They joined the audience.
Amidst the celebration's pomp and grandeur, the absence of Edward Mutesa, president of Uganda, was visibly noticeable, following the bitter rivalry between him and the Prime Minister, and also the collapse of UPC Kabaka Eka alliance. And in his address, Obote expressed no remorse.
Independence and sovereignty cannot be shared, and Uganda cannot be permitted to relinquish her independence to self-appointed rulers of the world.
When Kabaka and Obote were falling out, Ibinjera attracted the KY and Obote and the traditionalists and Mutesa, because his right-wing ideology had an element of conservatism, of traditionalism. So he started mobilizing them, and there was a strategy of fighting the Obote Kakonge camp within the party. And that was very, very amiable to the Kabaka.
Now, at that time, the anti-Obote factions were ready to use any means they could get to, including the violent crisis in Congo then, to disorganize his government. On 30th June 1960, the Republic of Congo, now Democratic Republic of Congo, was granted independence from its Belgian colonialists. Patrice Lumumba, the young articulate clerk, was installed as the country's first prime minister. Lumumba was a popular nationalist who did not have kind words for the Belgian exploiters. The independence euphoria did not last long. 12 weeks after independence, Lumumba's government was deposed. Congo was plunged into a brutal civil war and utter chaos, during which Lumumba was assassinated. The crisis sucked in world superpowers, the Soviet Union and USA, with each wanting to take control. The case of Patrice Lumumba was symbolic of how African independence would be crushed by Cold War strategic interests. Soon, Congo became a battleground for all interest groups, including some African countries, who mainly moved in to support the pro-Lumumbist rebels.
A rebel movement emerged, led by Jebe and Oleng, against Shombe. And Obote, being a nationalist, thought that Shombe had betrayed African nationalism because he was involved in the murder of Lumumba. He arranged for Jebe to come to Mbale and meet the other East African leaders who pledged them support. And in the process, these rebels met Amin and entrusted him with the role of buying for them arms. So they gave him gold and ivory and some money. And actually, I think Amin deposited around 480,000 Uganda shillings to buy those arms. Actually, the arms came and they were intercepted in Kenya, which became a small scandal. And Obote had to go there and apologize.
Daudi Ocheng, a son of an Acholi chief and Kabaka Eka member of parliament for Mityana, had been introduced into the Buganda royal circles way back in 1930s. Like many children of chiefs, Ocheng went to King's College Budo, where he met young Mutesa, and the two became very close friends from the age of 5. Ocheng was subsequently encouraged by Mutesa to join politics. It is because of this special friendship that he was ready to play any role in any move to confront anyone who posed a threat not only to his friend Mutesa, but the entire Buganda kingdom. Following the trend of events, on February the 22nd, 1966, Ocheng moved a motion in parliament that was later to change Uganda's political landscape.
Ocheng moved that they should investigate the Deputy Army Commander, Colonel Amin, the Minister of Defense, Felix Sonama, and Obote himself and Nechon, Minister of Information, for allegedly stealing gold and ivory from Congo.
The motion read that this House do urge government to suspend from duty Colonel Idi Amin of Uganda Army forthwith pending conclusion of police investigations into allegations regarding his bank account, which should be passed on to the appropriate authority, whose decision on the matter should be made public. During the course of introduction of the motion, Ocheng took liberty to cast accusations on the credibility of Obote, the Prime Minister, Felix Onama, Defense Minister, and Odokone Kyon, Minister of Planning. The three officials Ocheng alleged had improperly obtained ivory, gold and money from Congolese rebels. They denied the accusations and demanded an apology from Ocheng, which Ocheng ignored. Obote announced his decision to set up a commission to investigate Ocheng's allegations. Instead of suspending Amin, Obote promoted him to the post of Army Commander of Uganda Army and created a new post for military advisor to the cabinet, into which he moved Brigadier Obote. Meanwhile, Grace Ibingira was organizing a movement within UPC and outside it to put restraint on Obote's ambitions.
The Congo Crisis and the Ocheng motion are the ones that actually blew up the relationship between Ibingira and Obote. Obote thought actually that Ibingira was very ambitious. He wanted to stage a coup. Ibingira at that time had actually even visited the US and
he was actually considered to be a CIA agent.
He visited the US and portrayed Obote as a communist. And that seemed to have credence because Obote at that time had visited China, had visited Russia, had visited Yugoslavia, and he was more inclined towards the Kakonge group. And Ibingira is also thought to have made inroads into the army. He had his brother, Major Katabarwa, who was the commander of Jinja Training Wing. They enlisted the army commander himself, Shabano Polot, though Mutesa. He was married to a Muganda, therefore that made him closer to the KYs. And many ministers, Bantu ministers, were also within Ibingira's group, apart from Kakongo, of course. And then Obote thought that the strategy was to have a coup.
Now, Obote had to move fast to bring the situation under control. On the 22nd of February 1966, he staged a coup against his own government, usurped all the powers, and quickly ordered the arrest and detention of the 5 ministers involved in the plot to overthrow the government: Grace Ibingira, George Magezi, Balaki Kiria, Mathias Ngobi, and Emmanuel Lumu.
We were arrested just before lunchtime, in the middle of a cabinet meeting, and then Obote had adjourned the cabinet. He went to his lodge, which was in Entebbe, close to the cabinet offices. And he simply told these ministers, the explanation he gave them, that he could no longer work with us, so he had to arrest us. I mean, we were too stubborn. The whole truth is that we were stubborn not for the sake of being so, but tremendous things were at stake. And I believe that we acted as a kind of a dam, just as a dam, and if a dam breaks, what broke through the dam you saw. We had a vested interest to save that government, but with so many things going wrong.
I was arrested because Obote thought that I had prominence in Usoga.
I think Obote was only being wise because they were about to move a vote of no confidence, or they almost moved a vote of no confidence in him.
Obote issued the following statement to justify his course of actions. In the interest of national stability and public security and tranquility, I have today, the 22nd February 1966, taken over all powers of government of Uganda. I shall henceforth be advised by a council whose members I shall name later. I have taken this course of action independently because of my understanding of the wishes of the people of this country for peace, order and prosperity. 5 former ministers have been put under detention pending investigations into their activities. I take this opportunity to assure everybody that the whole situation is under control. With the technical help from Godfrey Lukongwa Binaisa, then Attorney General, a provisional constitution to govern the country was quickly put together.
With of course, the Attorney General, who was that time Binaisa, they sat and I think designed a new constitution and suspended the 1962 Independence Constitution to bring order, and Obote consolidated powers.
Dr. Obote becomes the executive prime minister of Uganda. The president out. The vice president, William Nadiope, who was UPC, also out. Because of this ambition, Obote had get those two out.
Now, in the next episode, we shall focus on the aftermath of Obote's power usurpation, the Congo Crisis, the abolition of the monarchies, and the creation of the Republican Constitution. Thanks for being part of our wider audience. See you next time.
Lele,